The sun was brutal that Saturday. Bleachers half full, cheap popcorn in sticky hands, coaches yelling half instructions across the field. It was the kind of middle school baseball game nobody would remember a week from now, except this one. Top of the fourth inning, bases empty. Ryan Ellison, 13, white clean swing, MVP of last year's team, was up at bat. His father, Greg, watched from the front row, sunglasses on, jaw set like always. Ryan hit a fast grounder, rounded first, turned for second, then he dropped. Not a stumble, not a trip. He collapsed, like someone had pulled the plug on him mid-stride. One moment full speed, the next sprawled across the base path, gripping his hip and screaming. The stadium froze. "Get up, Rye!" someone yelled, but Ryan didn't get up. He twisted, clutched at his leg, face red from something deeper than pain, panic. His mother ran from the stands. The coach waved his arms frantically. Within 5 minutes, the ambulance pulled in from the edge of the field, tires carving deep lines in the outfield grass. The fluorescent lighting buzzed steady and cold. Ryan lay on the gurney, pale, sweating, eyes darting around the room. A nurse finished wrapping a cuff around his arm, then gave his parents the smile that meant nothing. "Vitals are fine. He's stable." Greg wasn't impressed. "He collapsed in the middle of a game. That's not fine." Dr. Alan Cohen, a mid-level orthopedic, entered holding a tablet. Initial X-rays came back clear. No fracture, maybe a strained ligament. "We'll need an MRI to rule out soft tissue injury." Ryan let out a grunt, barely able to shift his leg. "It hurts when I move it, but it also hurts when I don't." Dr. Cohen didn't look up. "Pain can be subjective." Greg stepped forward. "Pain can also be real, and my son doesn't fake it." Ryan's mother, Andrea, placed a calming hand on Greg's arm. "We just want answers." Dr. Cohen nodded. "You'll get them, but this doesn't look emergent," Greg scoffed. "My son dropped like he was shot. If that's not emergent, what the hell is?" There was an awkward pause. Cohen, already halfway out the door, muttered, "I'll refer the case for review." Dr. Nathan Lee dropped the file onto the conference table. 13-year-old. Sudden collapse during physical activity. No fever, no trauma. Pain in the right hip. Normal imaging. The team gathered around the table. "Could be early onset arthritis," Dr. Mishra offered, flipping through the chart. "Could be attention-seeking behavior," said Dr. Kim. "Kids exaggerate when they know they're being watched." Dr. Renee Morgan didn't say anything. She was already studying the vitals, tapping her pen against her lips, eyes narrowed. "CBC is clean. No inflammation markers," Lee continued. "Pain is described as deep, burning, radiating from the hip into the groin." "Neurological," Mishra suggested. "Could be," Lee replied. "But the neuroconsult cleared him for discharge. They want us to confirm before they send him home." Renee finally spoke. "His pain sounds real, but it's not mechanical." Kim looked up. "You think it's psychological?" Renee shook her head. "I think it's neurological, but not brain-based, peripheral, something the scans missed." Lee tilted his head, interested. Greg's voice echoed in Renee's mind from the ER notes. "My son doesn't fake pain." She closed the file slowly. "Maybe the problem isn't in his hip. Maybe the problem is how his body is reacting to pain itself." Lee leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "All right, let's dig. Morgan, he's yours." Ryan opened his eyes slowly. The hospital room was dim, quiet, save for the occasional soft beeping of the heart monitor beside him. His leg was numb, elevated slightly on a foam cushion. He looked tired, but more than that, confused. The door opened with a soft knock. Dr. Lee stepped in, followed by a new face. "Morning, Ryan," Lee said, flipping through the chart. "I'm Dr. Lee, and this is Dr. Morgan. She'll be leading your case from here." Ryan blinked. "Another doctor?" "Yeah," Lee smiled. "You're officially a medical mystery now. That's kind of our thing." Renee stepped forward, not overly warm but focused. "Professional. Hi, Ryan. I've read over your scans and I'd like to ask a few questions, if that's okay." Before Ryan could respond, the door opened again. This time, harder. Greg Ellison entered, shoulders squared, gaze already calculating. Andrea, his wife, trailed just behind, clutching her purse. Greg's eyes went straight to Renee. His jaw stiffened. "You're the one in charge now?" he asked. Lee kept it light. "Dr. Morgan is one of our best." Greg gave a tight, non-committal nod. "Uh-huh." Renee stepped forward anyway. "Mr. Ellison, Mrs. Ellison, I'm Dr. Morgan. I'll be working closely with your son. We're still running tests, but I have a few theories I'd like to explore." "What kind of theories?" Greg asked, folding his arms. "Neurological, possibly pain amplification syndromes. The injury doesn't seem structural, but the symptoms are very real." Andrea looked up, hopeful. "You mean like nerve pain?" "Potentially, yes." Greg cut in, his tone sharper now. "So you're saying nothing's broken, nothing shows up on scans, but he's still in pain. And now it's a syndrome?" Renee kept her voice steady. "I'm saying the pain is real, and we're looking deeper." There was a pause. Greg's eyes narrowed. "And how much of this pain is in his head?" "None," Renee said calmly. "It's not psychological, it's neurological, that's different." Greg didn't respond. He just looked at her, longer than necessary. Then turned to Lee. "No offense, but we'd prefer if someone else handled his care. Someone with more experience." Andrea flinched. Lee blinked. "Dr. Morgan is fully qualified." "I didn't say she wasn't qualified," Greg interrupted. "I said we prefer someone else. That's our right, isn't it?" Renee didn't move, didn't react. She just looked at Ryan. He looked back, and for a split second, just one, he looked ashamed. Andrea stepped forward. "Greg." "No," Greg said, his voice harder now. "This is our son, we get a say." Lee gave Renee a glance. It wasn't permission, it was acknowledgement. "I'll check with Dr. Kane," Lee said, closing the chart. "Excuse us." They stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind them. Lee leaned against the wall, exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry about that." Renee was already scribbling notes. "Don't be. He's intense." She didn't look up. "He's scared, and scared people protect their bias like it's a life vest." Lee nodded. "Still want the case?" Renee paused, then looked up. "I'm not here to be wanted. I'm here to fix what no one else can." The door to Dr. Kane's office clicked shut behind Lee. She didn't look up right away, just scribbled a signature at the bottom of a form, calm as ever. "They want a different doctor," Lee said, flat. "I read the note," Kane replied. "They're invoking patient rights, nothing we can do." "He's a minor," Lee argued. "The mother didn't even agree." "The father did," she said, finally looking up. "And he's legally within his bounds." Lee sighed. "So we're letting a man's prejudice dictate patient care?" Kane leaned back, her tone unshaken. "We're letting a family make a decision about their son's treatment. You've been in this game long enough to know the difference." There was a long pause. Kane continued, gentler now. "Reassign the case. Let's keep the temperature down. Give it to someone they'll trust." Lee nodded once and left without another word. Renee sat alone at the glass table in the diagnostics conference room. A few printed scans spread in front of her. All clean. Too clean. She marked one in pencil, circled a tiny shadow no one else would have looked at twice. Lee stepped in. "They've reassigned the case," he said quietly. Renee didn't look up. "To who?" "Dr. Campbell, pain specialist, Kane's pick." She finally looked up. "He'll start nerve blockers?" "Probably." Renee nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. Lee hesitated. "You still think it's CRPS?" "I don't know," she replied. "Not for sure, but it's behaving like it." Lee studied her face. "You could take a different case." She turned the scan toward him. "Or I could find something Campbell won't." He gave a tired smile. "You don't make things easy, do you?" "I'm not here for easy." Dr. Campbell, mid-50s, polished and practiced, stood beside Ryan's bed explaining nerve treatment with confident hands. "This will block the pain signals from reaching your brain," he said. "Simple. Clean. Effective." Greg looked satisfied. Andrea still seemed uneasy. Ryan, pale and quiet, didn't say anything. Campbell smiled. "You'll be up in no time." He didn't notice the boy wince, not from pain but from pressure. Renee poured herself lukewarm coffee. A nurse passed by. "Rough day?" she asked. Renee nodded, watching Ryan's room number blink on the screen. "Still following that case?" "Let's just say," Renee murmured, "I'm not ready to stop watching." The hallway outside room 2113 was quiet, except for the occasional murmur of nurses and the rhythmic beep of monitors behind closed doors. Renee didn't enter. She just stood in front of the observation window, coffee in hand, watching. Inside, Ryan lay flat. His eyes stared at the ceiling, not blinking, not asleep. A soft brace supported his leg. The room was dim. Dr. Campbell entered with a nurse, chatting too casually for the setting. "Pain scale?" Campbell asked. 6, the nurse replied, looking at the chart. "Still no improvement." Campbell sighed. "We'll up the blockers. He's just hypersensitive. It'll even out." Renee didn't flinch. She was watching something else entirely. Ryan's fingers twitched, not his whole hand, just the smallest movement, like his body was responding to something invisible. She pulled out her tablet, reviewed her notes. No fever, no trauma. Pain radiates across regions. All tests normal. Reactions inconsistent, but real. She tapped in one word beneath it all: disassociation. Lee entered, glancing around. "You're still tracking him?" he asked. Renee didn't stop writing. "Campbell's treatment isn't working. His pain's spreading. Now it's moving to the other leg." "That's not possible." "No, it is," she said, looking up. "If it's CRPS type 1, that's what it does. Rewires pain in the nervous system, turns it into a loop." Lee sighed. "You don't have access. I don't need access to notice when a boy flinches before anyone touches him." He hesitated. "Kane doesn't want friction." "She has friction," Renee said calmly. "She just doesn't want proof she's wrong." Andrea sat alone, staring into a styrofoam cup. Her shoulders sagged, her fingers restless. Renee stepped in slowly. "I'm not here as your son's doctor," she said gently. "I just wanted to ask if he's had panic attacks before." Andrea blinked. "No, not really." "Why?" "Because he's breathing like someone who's bracing. Not for pain, but for trauma." Andrea's eyes shifted. "He said it started out of nowhere." Renee sat across from her. "Sometimes the body remembers things long before the mind does, and sometimes pain is the only way it can speak." Andrea didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Ryan stared at the ceiling again. A single tear rolled down from his left eye. His body didn't move, but something inside him was screaming. Renee stood just outside the doorway again, half shadowed by the curtain, arms folded, eyes locked on Ryan. He lay the same way he had for days, flat, still, like movement would betray him. But this time, his foot shifted. Barely. Once. Then again, Renee entered slowly. "Hey, Ryan," she said softly. "I know I'm not technically your doctor anymore. I just wanted to check in." No response. She didn't expect one. She pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed, not too close. She didn't look at him directly, just enough to be there. You know, when pain moves without reason, doctors usually try to chase it. Meds, scans, more meds. But pain that moves has its own story. You just have to speak its language. His fingers twitched again. She didn't react. "Your body's talking, Ryan. You just need someone who's willing to listen." Andrea sat at a table, untouched food in front of her. Renee approached, holding a folder but not opening it. "He's reacting more to silence than sound," Renee said. "He flinches when people don't touch him. That's a trauma loop." Andrea didn't look surprised. She looked tired. "His dad thinks this is just weakness," she whispered. "But I've seen him sit in pain for hours without making a sound." Renee nodded. "Because sometimes strength is hiding just to stay alive." Andrea finally looked up. "Do you really think it's in his nerves?" "I think," Renee said carefully, "his nervous system is on fire, and no one's noticed because it doesn't show up on scans." Ryan sat up, just barely. A pillow behind his back, Andrea beside him, brushing his hair back gently. Renee stood near the monitor, watching the boy's breathing slow. "You know, we don't have to do this the way your dad expects," Andrea said softly. Ryan didn't speak, but he looked at her. Then, for the first time in days, he nodded. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. Renee placed the scan printouts on Lee's desk. "I know what this is. Lee raised an eyebrow. You still don't have clearance. I don't need it anymore, she replied. The mother just asked me to step back in. He stared for a second, then smiled. Hell of a first move. Renee turned toward the door, already moving. He's not done speaking yet. The blinds were drawn in room 2113. Afternoon light filtered through the slats in thin gold stripes, slicing the silence. Renee stood at the foot of the bed. Andrea sat beside Ryan, hand in his hair. Greg stood by the window, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I wanted to go over some findings with you both, Renee began, calm, measured. But her voice had weight. Greg didn't turn. I thought you were off this case. Andrea cut in gently. I asked her to step back in. Renee continued. We've ruled out fractures, infections, tumors, and muscular damage. But Ryan's pain is real, debilitating, and spreading. Greg turned slowly. So what is it? What's causing it? Renee met his gaze. It's called CRPS, Complex Regional Pain Syndrome. It's a rare condition that affects the nervous system, sometimes triggered by a minor injury. The body essentially goes into overdrive. It misreads pain signals and amplifies them. Greg frowned. That sounds made up. It's not, Renee said simply. It's underdiagnosed, not imaginary. How do you know it's that? Because everything else is normal, and this explains every symptom. The pain's progression, the sensitivity, even the emotional shutdown. Greg scoffed. You're blaming his brain. I'm explaining what his nervous system is doing. The pain is real, and if we wait too long it becomes permanent. Andrea's eyes filled. Is it curable? With the right treatment, yes, Renee said, but timing matters. Greg's voice sharpened. So now what? Pills, shrinks, experimental voodoo? Renee didn't react. No, just science and time. And for the first time, someone who actually sees him. Greg looked at his son. Ryan wasn't looking back. He was looking at Renee, and he was listening. Renee turned to Greg. I know I'm not the doctor you wanted. She looked at Andrea. But I'm the one who didn't stop looking. Greg opened his mouth, then closed it. Andrea reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. Lee caught up with Renee as she stepped out of the room. You told them, she nodded. And? He didn't throw a chair, so I'll take that as progress. Lee smiled. You sure about CRPS? Yes, she said. And I'm done waiting for permission to be right. The hallway outside room 213 was tense. Nurses moved quietly. Lee stood with his arms crossed, watching as Renee reviewed the medication chart. Kane approached from the other end, tablet in hand. I've authorized your treatment plan, she said without warmth. Officially, Renee didn't look up. Appreciate the paperwork, I'm already behind. Just remember, if it backfires, it's on you. Renee looked her in the eye. It always was. Ryan lay still. He hadn't spoken since the morning. His face was pale, lips slightly parted, fingers curled under the blanket. Andrea sat beside him, rubbing his shoulder in slow, rhythmic circles. Greg stood in the corner, arms no longer crossed, hands in his pockets. Quiet. Renee entered with a nurse. We're starting low-dose ketamine and neurostimulation, she said softly. It may take hours, maybe days, but we start now. Andrea nodded, but her eyes said, please, please let this work. Greg didn't speak. Renee looked at Ryan. His eyes were open but blank. Ryan, she said gently, you're still here. I need you to stay. No reaction. She inserted the IV herself. Vitals stable, the nurse said. Now we wait, Renee whispered. The screen showed Ryan's vitals. Steady, shallow, still no change. Lee sat beside her. You're sure this is the right move? No, Renee said, but it's the only move. Andrea had fallen asleep beside the bed. Renee returned quietly, checked the chart, checked the lines. Nothing spiked, nothing dropped. Then Ryan blinked. Once, then again. Renee leaned in. Ryan? He didn't speak, but he turned his head, slightly. Just enough. Then a whisper, so faint it barely registered. Hurts. Less. Renee closed her eyes, not in relief, in fury, at every day wasted before this one. The morning light cut through the blinds in long golden bars. For the first time in days, the room didn't feel sterile. It felt hopeful. Renee stepped inside holding a clipboard, but it was just a prop now. Her eyes went straight to Ryan. He was sitting up, barely, but upright. Andrea looked up from the chair beside him, eyes rimmed red, not from crying, but from holding it in too long. "He asked for water," she whispered. "First time he asked for anything." Renee smiled. "That's good." Greg stood by the window again. Not out of control this time, just still. Ryan looked at Renee. "Did I pass out?" he asked, voice gravelly. "No," she said. "You fought, and you're still fighting." He blinked, too tired to process, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Greg stepped forward, unsure. He reached for Ryan's hand, but hesitated. "He's still my son," he said softly. "To no one. To everyone." Renee looked at him. He never stopped being. Greg didn't respond, just nodded, barely. Lee leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. Renee stood across from him, silent. "You did it," he said. "He's improving." Renee nodded. "But it's not just the meds." Lee raised an eyebrow. "It's that he was finally believed." Greg walked beside Renee, not ahead, not behind. "When you first walked in," he began, "I thought, hell, I knew you weren't the one." Renee didn't answer. "I thought you wouldn't get him. Couldn't." She waited. Greg turned slightly toward her. "But you saw him. Before I did." She finally replied, "You weren't looking for a doctor, you were looking for a mirror." He stopped walking. She didn't. The rehab room smelled like alcohol wipes and fear. Parallel bars gleamed under the white lights. A physical therapist stood by with soft encouragement. Andrea stood off to the side, hands clenched, silently praying. Greg leaned against the far wall, unmoving. Renee? She didn't speak. She just watched. Ryan sat on the edge of the padded table. Sweat already dotted his forehead, though he hadn't even stood up yet. "You don't have to rush it," the therapist said gently. "We can just try weight transfer today." Ryan shook his head. "I want to stand." The room paused. Greg shifted but said nothing. Ryan placed his hands on the bars, arms trembling under his own weight. The room shrank to silence. Renee's gaze never left him. One foot slid forward, then the other. His knees buckled. The therapist reached. But Ryan didn't fall. He locked his jaw, pushed. He stood. For 2 seconds, maybe 3. But in that span, the entire story shifted. Andrea choked back a sob. Greg looked away, as if ashamed of how much it shook him. Ryan turned his head slightly, looked toward Renee. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. She simply nodded. Once, Ryan understood. Renee leaned against the railing, watching the horizon darken over the city. Lee joined her, 2 coffees in hand. "Big day," he said. "I didn't do it," Renee replied. Lee glanced sideways. "You didn't?" "No," she said, eyes still forward. "He did." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Lee added, "But he only tried because you believed he could." Renee said nothing, but she didn't have to. The boardroom smelled like leather chairs and diluted coffee. Around the oval table sat department heads, hospital administrators, and Dr. Judith Kane at the center. A PowerPoint clicked through charts: Ryan's vitals, recovery speed, response to treatment. "Significant improvement in just 4 days," said Dr. Campbell, now slightly less smug than usual. "Diagnosis, CRPS, early stage. Treatment, low-dose ketamine and physical reconditioning. Standard approach. Nothing experimental." Kane nodded. "Well done. Let's consider documenting this for internal case review." Lee cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, "the diagnosis wasn't Campbell's. It was Dr. Renee Morgan's. She had the theory before anyone else even saw the pattern." Silence. Kane blinked. "Morgan? I thought she was removed from the case." "She never left it," Lee said, voice steady. "She just kept working while the rest of us caught up." Kane sipped her coffee. "Well, regardless, the patient's improving. Let's make sure the family knows they received excellent care." Click. "Next slide." Lee looked down, said nothing. René leaned against the wall watching as Ryan practiced with crutches. He moved slow but with purpose. The therapist spoke softly beside him. Andrea was nearby, smiling for the first time in days. Greg stood at the doorframe, arms crossed, not in defiance anymore, in thought. He turned to René. "I didn't say thank you." She didn't blink. "You still haven't." He let out a slow breath. "I don't know what I was protecting." René's eyes locked on his. "Your image of control," she said. Greg nodded. "Does it ever come back?" René looked at Ryan, now laughing faintly, as he stumbled forward and caught himself. "No. But something better takes its place." René sat on the bench pulling off her coat. Her phone buzzed. One new message. "We're naming you on the official case notes. Thought you should know." "Lee." She didn't reply. She just smiled, barely, then slid the phone into her bag and walked out. The room was half empty now. The bags were packed, the sheets stripped. The bouquet of get well soon balloons deflated slightly in the corner. Ryan sat in a wheelchair by the door, tapping the armrest nervously. His cheeks were no longer pale, his voice was stronger, but his eyes still held a trace of something quiet, something that had changed him. Andrea signed the discharge forms with practiced care. Greg stood behind her, hands in his pockets, unsure of what to do with them. René entered, holding a slim blue folder. "You'll want to follow up with outpatient physio twice a week," she said, "and stay on the neuropathic meds until pain drops below a 3 consistently." Andrea nodded. "We will, thank you." René handed the folder to Ryan. "You did most of this. Don't forget that." Ryan looked up. "You didn't give up on me." She knelt to his level. "I saw you," she said. That was enough. The elevator dinged. Greg pushed the wheelchair slowly. Andrea held the doors. As they reached the lobby, he turned to René. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About a lot." René tilted her head. "You were scared." He nodded. "That's not an excuse." "No," she replied, "but it's a start." He held out his hand. She looked at it, then shook it briefly. No performance, no smile, just mutual clarity. As the doors closed behind them, René remained at the entrance. The wind picked up slightly. Papers rustled at the nurse's desk. Lee stepped beside her, watching the family leave. "You good?" he asked. She took a long breath. "Better than when I started." The table was cluttered with charts, 2 coffee cups and a single manila folder. Lee leaned back in his chair. "You want the next case?" René flipped through lab results. "Only if it doesn't involve lawsuits or allergic reactions to gluten." Lee smirked. 82-year-old woman. History of strokes. Came in with a migraine. Now she can't recognize her daughter. René raised an eyebrow. "CT? Clear. Blood work? Impossibly boring." She looked up. "Which is why it's mine." He tossed the folder toward her. "Don't get too comfortable. She already bit 2 residents." René caught it mid-air. "My kind of patient." As she walked past room 213, she paused. It was empty now. Clean. Sheets folded tight. The smell of antiseptic still clung to the doorframe. Just another room again. She stared for a second longer than necessary, then moved on. Kane stood at the front, leading a departmental recap. Slides flicked behind her. "We've completed internal review of the Morgan Ellison case," she said. "Positive outcome. No formal objections. Protocol observed. René wasn't in the room. She was never invited." A junior resident whispered to a nurse pointing down the hall. "That's the one who figured it out, right? The black doctor?" The nurse smiled. "Yeah, the one no one listened to until she was the only one left." René stood alone, hands in her coat pocket. She wasn't watching the view, she was listening. Behind her, Lee stepped into frame. "She still doesn't want to put your name on the case note," he said. René didn't turn. "I didn't need it there. You earned it, though. I did it for him, not for her." Lee leaned on the railing beside her. "You did it for you." She glanced at him. "You always have to make it poetic, don't you?" He grinned. "Poetry's just medicine for the soul. You should try it sometime." René shook her head. "No, I treat what's real." Ryan walks again. No brace, no chair, just steps. Slow but steps, his mother beside him silent. Greg a few paces behind, carrying a jacket he doesn't offer. They're figuring it out. As a family, as people, as survivors. Renee steps into the room of the elderly patient. Confused eyes meet hers. The woman blinks. "Are you the nurse?" Renee doesn't flinch. "I'm the reason you'll remember your name tomorrow." She closes the door. And for just a moment, there's silence, not because no one's speaking, but because one voice was finally heard. Subscribe to hear the stories no one else is telling, the ones that fight bias, one diagnosis at a time.